Hello, dear story lovers. At the amount of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a huge series of special stories for you. Subscribe now. The Starlight Wanderer pierced the dense atmosphere of Zelo 7, its hull creaking as turbulence clawed at the ship. Captain Elara Tran, a seasoned explorer with an insatiable curiosity for the unknown, gripped the controls with steady hands. Beside her, the ship's AI, Zax, monitored the descent. Atmospheric composition, 42% oxygen, 48% nitrogen, trace elements. Perfect for humans, Zax's modulated voice chimed. But the electromagnetic field anomalies are unsettling. Noted, Elara replied, her eyes fixed on the holographic display. Below, vast iridescent forests stretched to the horizon, their towering crystalline trees glinting in the light of Zelo's VI's twin suns. The mission was simple: investigate the legend of the Sword of Tar. According to interstellar records and the cryptic tales of Zelosian refugees, the sword had been stuck in stone for millennia, immovable even by the mightiest of the native Tal. The rumors hinted at an ancient technology, possibly linked to an extinct precursor civilization. Such a discovery could elevate Elara's struggling reputation in the exploration guild and solve the financial woes dogging her crew. The ship settled into a clearing surrounded by towering, bioluminescent flora. As the engines powered down, Elara exhaled, unstrapping herself from the pilot's chair. Zax, keep the ship secure. Rodek, Lara, with me, she called into her communicator, summoning her chief engineer and exobiologist. Outside, the air was thick with an earthy, metallic tang, and the ground sparkled with shards of crystalline growths. As the trio stepped onto the surface, they were met by a delegation of Tal. The aliens stood nearly 8 feet tall, their scaled, iridescent skin shifting colors with their emotions. Their eyes, a piercing gold, focused intently on Elara. Human, rumbled the lead Tal, who introduced himself as Shverik. His voice resonated like a distant drum. You come seeking the Sword of Tar. Elara nodded. We come to learn. To understand why it's here and why no one has been able to move it. Shverik tilted his head, his scales rippling in an unreadable pattern. Many have come before you. All have failed. The sword chooses no one. And yet, Elara said, her tone cautious, your people keep the legend alive. Shverik's golden eyes narrowed. Because it is the will of the Ancient Ones. They say the sword is not for us to wield. Perhaps not for you either. The Tal led the group deeper into the forest, where the crystalline trees formed an almost cathedral-like canopy. As they approached the fabled site, a palpable tension filled the air. The clearing opened into a circular stone platform, etched with glowing runes that pulsed in time with an unseen rhythm. At its center stood the Sword of Tar. The sword was breathtaking. Its hilt shimmered with gemstones that refracted light into rainbows, and its blade seemed to hum faintly, as though alive. It was embedded in an obsidian block, its surface smooth and unyielding. The scene was otherworldly, a blend of ancient mysticism and advanced technology. Shverik gestured towards the sword. For generations, our strongest warriors have tried to free it. Some say it is a test. Others, a curse. None know its purpose. Elara stepped forward, her heart pounding. The sword seemed to beckon her, though she dismissed the sensation as nerves. She glanced at Rodek and Lara, who watched silently, their faces a mixture of awe and skepticism. You're really going to try? Rodek asked, his tone incredulous. I didn't come all this way to just look, Elara replied, her voice steady but her palms damp. We'll observe first. Learn everything we can. If there's a way to understand this thing, we'll find it. As she began scanning the area with her multi-tool, Zax's voice crackled through her earpiece. Be cautious, Captain. The sword emits faint but consistent energy readings. There's more to this artifact than meets the eye. Elara nodded absently, but her attention was riveted on the sword. The longer she stood near it, the stronger the pull became, like a silent whisper only she could hear. She didn't know what awaited her, but deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The sword of Tar shimmered in the pale light of Zelos VI's twin suns, its faint hum vibrating through the air. Elara stood before it, her multi-tool buzzing as it scanned the obsidian pedestal and the surrounding runes. The data projected onto her visor told her little, save for a confirmation of what Zax had already detected. The sword radiated a peculiar energy signature. It was ancient yet impossibly advanced, nothing like the crude weapons used by any civilization the galaxy had catalogued. Behind her, Shverik and his retinue of tall warriors observed silently, their golden eyes unblinking. The tension in the air was palpable, and Elara could feel their expectation pressing on her like the gravity of a neutron star. No one outside the Tal has ever tried to lift the sword, Lara murmured, her voice tinged with both curiosity and caution. The exobiologist knelt near the pedestal, running her hand over the glowing runes. The symbols. They look like they're reacting to proximity. Almost as if the sword knows we're here. Elara nodded, feeling the truth in Lara's words. It wasn't just proximity, the sword seemed to radiate an awareness, as though it were watching her just as she watched it. She turned to Shverik, her tone steady but probing. What happens when someone tries to lift it? Shverik's scales rippled with a faint green hue, an expression of uncertainty. Nothing, and yet everything. The sword does not move, but those who attempt to lift it often speak of visions, of whispers from the ancient ones. Some leave unharmed. Others. He hesitated. Others are broken by the experience. Comforting, Roddick muttered, earning a sharp glance from Elara. This is a scientific mission, Roddick, she said firmly. We're here to observe, document, and understand. But the sword won't break me. I'm not planning to be reckless. As if drawn by invisible strings, Elara took a step closer to the sword. The runes around the pedestal pulsed brighter with each step, their rhythm syncing with her heartbeat. The Tal murmured among themselves, their melodic language rising and falling like a chant. Captain, Zax's voice crackled through her comms, the energy output is spiking. Recommend proceeding with caution. Elara reached the pedestal and extended a hand. As her fingers brushed the hilt, a shock of warmth traveled up her arm. The world around her seemed to slow, the murmurs of the Tal fading into a distant hum. She gripped the hilt firmly. The instant she did, the ground beneath her feet glowed with an intricate lattice of symbols, spreading outward from the pedestal like ripples in a pond. A sharp wind whipped through the clearing, though the air had been still moments before. Elara gasped as her mind was flooded with images fragmented yet vivid. She saw towering beings of light crafting the sword in a time long forgotten. She saw planets, civilizations, and wars fought across the stars. Then, a single figure, a humanoid, cloaked in shadow, reached for the sword and raised it high, unleashing a cascade of energy that reshaped entire worlds. Captain. Roddick's voice snapped her back to reality. She released the hilt, staggering back as the glowing lattice faded. Her breaths came in short gasps, her vision swimming. The sword remained unmoved. Are you all right? Lara asked, steadying her. I'm fine, Elara said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her limbs. But it wasn't just a sword. It's connected to something. A memory? A purpose? I don't know how to explain it. Shverik stepped forward, his imposing form towering over her. You felt the call of the Ancient Ones, he said, his tone reverent. And yet, you did not break. Elara glanced back at the sword, its faint hum now a persistent whisper in her mind. She clenched her fists. I didn't come this far to walk away now. If this sword has a purpose, we're going to figure it out. Shverik's golden eyes glimmered with approval. Then you must try again, human. You must prove yourself worthy. But know this, no one has ever succeeded. Elara nodded, determination stealing her features. There's a first time for everything. As the Tal watched, Elara prepared herself for another attempt, the weight of an ancient mystery pressing heavily on her shoulders. The test was far from over, and the sword was not done with her yet. Elara stood before the Sword of Tar, its hum now resonating deep within her chest. The pedestal and runes glowed faintly, as if waiting for her to make her move. Around her, the Tal stood in an odd semicircle, their usual stoicism replaced with palpable tension. Shverik, the elder warrior, stepped forward. "Human," he said gravely, "if you proceed, understand that this is no mere test of strength. It is a trial of spirit, will, and purpose. Should you fail, the consequences could ripple far beyond this clearing." Elara met his golden gaze, her expression unwavering. "I understand the risks, but I can't walk away. This sword isn't just a relic. It's a key to something much bigger, and I need to find out what." Shverik nodded solemnly, stepping back into the circle. The other Tal began chanting softly, their voices low and melodic. The sound reverberated through the clearing, blending with the hum of the sword. Roderick and Lara exchanged uncertain glances, but neither spoke, knowing that whatever was about to happen was far beyond their understanding. Elara approached the pedestal once more, her pulse pounding in her ears. The sword's hilt seemed to shimmer as she reached for it, the gemstones glowing brighter with each passing second. When her fingers closed around the hilt, a surge of energy shot through her body, far more intense than before. She cried out, but she didn't let go. The clearing dissolved around her, replaced by an endless expanse of stars. Elara found herself floating in a vast void, her body weightless. Before her, the sword floated, its blade glowing brighter than ever. Around it, a series of translucent figures appeared, their forms shifting between humanoid and something far more alien. Their voices echoed in her mind, a cacophony of overlapping tones that somehow resolved into words she could understand. "You are not tall," one of the beings said, its voice like a gentle breeze. "Why do you seek the Sword of Tar?" Elara swallowed hard, her resolve steadying her in the strange, overwhelming space. "I seek understanding. Your sword, your legacy, it could hold answers to questions we've barely begun to ask. I'm not here to conquer or take. I'm here to learn." The figures circled her, their ethereal forms pulsing with light. Another spoke, its voice deeper and resonant. "The sword is a burden as much as it is a gift. To wield it is to accept responsibility for what lies ahead. Do you believe yourself worthy of such a mantle?" Elara hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I don't know if I'm worthy. But I'll do everything I can to rise to the challenge." The being seemed to confer silently before one stepped forward, raising a hand-like appendage. "Then you shall face the weight of the blade. If your resolve is true, the sword will know." The void shattered like glass, and Elara was thrust back into the clearing. The chanting of the Tal had grown louder, more fervent, and the runes beneath her feet blazed with light. The sword in her hand felt impossibly heavy, as though it carried the weight of an entire galaxy. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she tightened her grip, focusing all her strength and willpower on the task. The ground trembled as Elara lifted the sword, inch by inch. The runes around the pedestal pulsed in unison, their glow growing brighter and brighter. A sound like a distant choir filled the air, and a column of light shot skyward, piercing the heavens. Gasps erupted from the Tal as Elara raised the sword fully above her head. The pedestal shattered into a million shards of obsidian, and the light from the runes surged into the blade, infusing it with an otherworldly energy. The weight she had felt moments ago disappeared, replaced by a profound sense of connection to the sword, to the planet, and to the beings who had forged it. Shverik dropped to one knee, followed by the rest of the Tal. "The prophecy. It is fulfilled," he whispered, awe evident in his voice. "You are the one the Ancient Ones spoke of." Elara lowered the sword, its blade now humming with a steady, powerful rhythm. She turned to Shverik, her voice steady despite the enormity of what had just transpired. "What does the prophecy say?" Shverik looked up at her, his golden eyes filled with reverence. The prophecy speaks of a stranger who will wield the Sword of Tar to unite the fractured tribes of Zelos 7 and defend the galaxy from a great darkness. The sword has chosen you, Elara Tran. Elara's heart raced as the implication sank in. She hadn't come here expecting to become a symbol or a savior, but now the weight of that responsibility rested squarely on her shoulders. She looked at Radek and Lara, who were staring at her with a mix of shock and awe. "Well," she said, forcing a small smile, "guess we're not just here to steady the sword anymore." The Tal rose, their chants transforming into a harmonious melody of hope and celebration. For the first time in generations, the Sword of Tar had been lifted and it had chosen a human. As Elara held the blade, its energy pulsing in her hand, she knew this was only the beginning of her journey. The energy of the Sword of Tar coursed through Elara's body as she stood before the gathered Tal. The weight of the prophecy was beginning to settle on her shoulders. Around her, the aliens' golden eyes shimmered with reverence, but she could feel the tension beneath their awe. Not all of them trusted her. Not all of them believed in the prophecy. Shverik stepped forward, bowing deeply. "The Ancient Ones have chosen you, but the tribes of Zelos 7 are not united. This sword's power is a beacon, but it is also a challenge. There are those who will see you as a threat." Elara tightened her grip on the sword. Its hum seemed to echo her growing resolve. "If uniting the tribes is what's needed to fulfill this prophecy, then I'll do it. But I'll need your help, Shverik. You know your people better than I ever could." The towering tall warrior nodded. "I will guide you. But the path will not be easy. The northern tribes follow their warlord, Vrynn. He sees only conquest and power. He will not bow easily, even to the chosen of the sword." Elara sheathed the sword in a makeshift holster Radek had rigged from her supplies. "Then Vrynn is where we start." The journey to the northern territories was grueling. The bioluminescent forests gave way to jagged cliffs and expansive plains of crystalline grass that sang when touched by the wind. Along the way, Elara and her crew learned more about the Tal. The fractured tribes had once been united under a single leader who wielded the Sword of Tar, but that leader's death centuries ago had sparked endless wars. Each tribe believed themselves the rightful heirs, and the sword had become a symbol of both hope and division. As they neared Vrynn's stronghold, a sprawling fortress carved into the face of a mountain, Shverik warned Elara again. Vrynn will not be swayed by words alone. He values strength above all. You must show him why the sword chose you. Inside the fortress, Vrynn sat on a throne of polished obsidian, his massive form adorned with armor made from the same crystalline material that covered the plains. His eyes burned with defiance as Elara entered the hall, flanked by Shverik and her crew. "You dare bring an outsider here, Shverik?" Vrynn growled, his voice like the grinding of stone. "This human has no place among us." Elara stepped forward, meeting Vrynn's gaze without flinching. "The sword chose me," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't come here to take your land or your power. I came to unite the tribes. There's a darkness coming, and if we don't stand together, none of us will survive." Vrynn rose to his full height, towering over Elara. "Words are cheap, human. The sword is nothing more than a relic. If you wish to lead, you'll have to prove you're worthy." The room fell silent as Vrynn drew his weapon, a massive glaive that shimmered with the same energy as the sword. The challenge was clear. Elara hesitated, glancing at Shverik, who gave her a subtle nod. Taking a deep breath, she unsheathed the Sword of Tar. The moment the blade left its holster, it erupted in a cascade of light, its hum growing louder. Gasps rippled through the gathered tall warriors, but Vrynn only sneered. "So it glows. That doesn't make you a leader." Vrynn lunged, his glaive slicing through the air with blinding speed. Elara barely managed to block the strike, the impact sending a shockwave through the hall. The sword in her hands seemed to guide her movements, countering each of VRYNN's attacks with precision. The duel was fierce, and though VRYNN's strength was overwhelming, Alara's determination and the sword's guidance kept her standing. Finally, in a moment of clarity, Alara saw an opening. She parried VRYNN's glaive and stepped inside his guard, the tip of her sword resting against his chest. The room fell silent. "I don't want to fight you," Alara said, her voice steady but breathless. "I want to fight with you. The darkness is real, and the sword chose me to lead because it knew I couldn't do it alone. But if you can't accept that, then finish this now." VRYNN stared at her for a long moment before lowering his glaive. His expression softened, though his eyes still burned with intensity. "You fight well, human. And you speak with conviction. Perhaps the sword was right to choose you." He turned to the gathered warriors. "The tribes have been divided for too long. If this human can wield the sword, then perhaps she can bring us together." In the days that followed, VRYNN and his warriors joined Alara's cause. Word of her victory spread quickly, and other tribes began to rally to her banner. Still, the challenges were far from over. Even as the tribes began to unite, a new threat loomed on the horizon. Zax detected a massive energy signature approaching Zelo's 7A fleet of ships, unlike anything Alara had seen before. Their design was alien, their purpose unknown. But as the sword pulsed in her hand, she felt a chilling certainty. The darkness was coming. Standing atop a cliff overlooking the gathering of united tribes, Alara held the sword of Tar aloft. Its light cut through the twilight sky, a beacon of hope against the encroaching void. "We stand together," she said, her voice carrying across the plains. "And together, we will face whatever comes." For the first time in centuries, the Tal stood united. And for the first time in her life, Alara felt the weight of true purpose. The sword of Tar had chosen her, but the battle to fulfill its destiny was just beginning.